Okay, and we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, Rob MacDonald from Iona.
Good afternoon for us here. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It is bright and early here in the great state of South Carolina, but it's good to connect with you on the Iona estate. As we've discussed, a lot of what we're doing at the moment is I am collecting information and really having interesting conversations with wine estates around the region. Iona is part of our fall, or as you would say in South Africa, our autumn window for our members, which of our club, which is called the Painted Dog, to get access to. And we have a very excited group of folks that are very passionate about the region and passionate about the wines coming out of the region. Just as a context, we have about 20 people that are probably going to be looking at your wines and putting orders in over the next few weeks. And really today is about giving them some information, insight into Iona and what you guys are doing on the farm. But I'm going to keep quiet for a second and hand it over to you, Rob, if you want to give us a little bit of context of who you are and what your role is at Iona. And then we can get into talking about the region, the estate, and the wines. Over to you, Rob.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. My name is Rob MacDonald. I'm head of operations with Iona Wines. I'm also Andrew Gunn's son-in-law, and Andrew Gunn founded the estate in the late 90s. So if anyone's worked closely with family before, you know what that's like, and it always makes life interesting. I have a background in geospatial sciences and spent the first 10 years of my career in London before moving to South Africa and joining the family business. So it's been a wonderful transition for me.
Amazing. So let's get into talking about the region where you guys are based. Obviously, you're more the Walker Bay side. I believe you're based in Elgin or in the surrounds of Elgin. A lot of the folks that will be watching this will know a lot about the region, but we may not know the sub-regions as much. They'll think about the winelands of the Western Cape, but may not know the nuances of Elgin versus Stellenbosch versus Paarl versus Swartland, for example. So I'd love if you can just give us a little talk around the geography of the region you're in, the climate, the terroir, of course, and where you're based within that, and how that geoclimate brings something magical to the wines and to the estate. So if you can give us a bit of that picture, then we can move on from there and talk about the estate itself.
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure. So of the more recent appellations within South Africa, and one of the lesser known, people obviously very familiar with the likes of Franschhoek, Stellenbosch, Swartland, Constantia, and they're much bigger and longer term producers. But Elgin actually has a long history with grape production right back into the 18th century. But as probably most people listening will have come across at some point, there was a phylloxera plague during the 18th century, which wiped out grapes across Europe, across almost everywhere except for South America, essentially, and Australia, which is why today we have to graft our vines onto American rootstocks, which is one of the fascinating things in the wine industry. So as a result of that plague, the valley moved towards apple production in a huge way, culminating in the sort of 60s and 70s, when Appletiser was founded in the valley. And so we're still called Appletiser Valley to this day. And all of your syrups for Appletiser still come from the Elgin Valley. Viticulture started to resurge towards the end of the century, and the first Sauvignon Blanc was produced in Elgin in 1990. And over the last sort of, what are we now, 30 years, there are now 20 wine farms in the region.
Wow.
It is the coolest wine region in the Cape, and we are the coolest farm in the coolest wine region in the Cape. So we're right up at 420 to 450 meters above sea level, overlooking the Elgin Valley and just 3 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean as well. So it's a hugely unique location. We're surrounded on all four sides by UNESCO certified Kogelberg biosphere, which is one of the most diverse flora and fauna regions in the world, not just in South Africa.
Wow.
So yeah, we have a fantastic, cool, long growing season, and our temperatures are also tempered by the Atlantic Ocean. So a lot of the wine regions I mentioned earlier are they're big hot regions, and they grow big red wine associated with that. But we have this phenomenon on Iona where the sea breezes coming from the Atlantic and are immediately forced up 400 or 500 meters. And by the time they reach our estate, they form these rolling misty clouds that blanket the farm. So we have this very slow ripening process on the farm, which leads to perfect acidity, very moderate alcohol, and the flavors are properly developed because we have true phenolic ripeness of grapes. An unusual stat about our climate that I always say is that we don't have any more than 30 hours per year at above 30 degrees, which is very cool. I think even in my years in London, we had more than 30 hours of 30 degrees. So yeah, it's quite exceptional. Our soils, like most of South Africa, are decomposed tables, mountain sandstones. A lot of South Africa was uplifted roughly 250 million years ago, so it's all sedimentary deposits and quartzites from that period. There was a river valley formed by the outwash of glaciers at the end of the last glacial period about 10,000 years ago, which has put a lovely clay bed right through our region. So the vines have to navigate these rocky soils before they can penetrate deep into this lovely clay layer, which completely removes any water stress for them. So they, yeah, it's a really nice combination of making the vines work a bit, but also not stressing them. So it's a delicate balance. So really, we irrigate for maybe the first couple of years of the vine's lives, but after that, once they're established, it's only in very exceptional circumstances.
That's quite unique, though, Rob, for the region, right? I mean, I think the you know, I was having a conversation just with a farm out in the Swartland and Wellington area the other day, and it feels like it's kind of in their world, water is everything, right? It's like it's so, you know, they struggle and they make sure that they have these big dams on their properties, and because, you know, the water situation is quite extreme there. But by the way you described that, by having that clay layer below the was it shale that you had? I don't forget what you described, but he's right, yeah. So that allows at least
sandstones and sedimentary deposits, yeah.
At least you've got that I'm going to be a little colloquial, like well of the clay below that, which allows for a bit more access to hydration. That's how I'm translating it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you guys, a quick question on, because I mean, do you guys do on the vines themselves? Do you do much of the bush vine, or is it mostly elevated off the soil?
So we trellis almost everything on our two properties. So Iona is our main property, and everything is trellised there. But Brocha, our sister property, owned by Andrew's wife Rosie, she farms biodynamically, and in biodynamic farming, they tend to lead towards a system called echelon, which is where you plant your vine at the bottom of a post, because the biodynamic philosophy says that you know, a vine doesn't want to be strapped to a trellis. It's not comfortable like that. So right. They actually let it grow as it would grow naturally, and then they just tie up it's 4 or 5 shoots for the year vertically up the echelon pole. So there's all sorts of quirky, intricate ways within biodynamic farming to try and look after the vine in better ways.
Awesome. So as a summary, just so I got to pitch it back to you for a second. So the Elgin, or at least the Iona region outside Elgin is, you've got a yeah, nice cool breezes coming through, high elevation, which brings in this sort of microclimate that it makes it super cool. And then you've got, been reading on some of your material, you've got these long white clouds that cover everything for a large part of the year, which makes, actually we can talk a little bit about this, about how it actually extends the harvest season to a certain degree, right? You were telling me about this the other day. I think it might be as long as 2 weeks where you guys are harvesting further out because of that, which is all part of that, as you mentioned, that biodiversity, the geography, the climate, and all that. So that's super clear. Can you talk a little bit about what that does to the wine itself? How does that impact the wine? That sort of description of the geography, terroir, etc. What does it do for the wine?
Ultimately, the main benefit of our site is that we have a long enough growing window that the vines are allowed to ripen fully. So the grapes
Right.
and the stems ripen fully. A lot of the world machine harvesters, so it doesn't get to benefit from that. So if you use machine harvesting, then you shake the plant and the grapes come off. But in South Africa, we hand harvest. So we cut each bunch of grapes from the vines, which means that we can use the stem of the bunch in our winemaking if we wish to. And because we have such a long ripening window, it allows our even the stem to ripen. So it's a strange concept, but the stem also turns green once it's fully ripe. And then it means that we can layer in some whole bunch fermentation into our winemaking, which adds huge complexity to the wine. The other issue in other regions around the world, and it does happen in Elgin as well in some vintages, but often if you've got temperatures that are too high, your grapes will ripen too quickly. So you won't have your sugars and your acid in balance, and you won't have fully developed the fruit flavors within those grapes. So you can still make great wines, but you're not going to be able to make world-class wines.
Because it ripens too fast, and that doesn't have the same sort of concentrate as than if it had to your point about struggle. It has that little bit extra struggle that they need to have at the end. The grapes aren't, the berries aren't as advanced, I guess, because you're having that longer sort of harvest time because they're on the vine longer. Very interesting in fact with that, which I was not aware of, is about how you do the whole bunch harvesting. And again, the way I'm hearing you describe it is that the stems are part of the process, not just the berries themselves, which obviously will bring a different, a slight nuance to the flavor profile, I would guess, by having the stems as
Absolutely.
part. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that gives a really good picture of the region. So thank you for that, Rob. Let's talk about the estate itself for a little bit. The Iona has in our previous conversations, you were talking about quite an interesting background. I'd love to just sort of dive into that a little bit and talk about the history. The name is interesting in itself. The owners, the winemakers, and I know you guys do some really interesting cultural stuff with the population there on the estate. So. Can you give us a little bit of a picture of that, and we can talk about Iona as an estate?
Absolutely. So it's very hard to talk about Iona without talking about Andrew Gunn. So yes. Andrew founded the farm in 1998, but he actually has a background as a businessman in Johannesburg. He was trained as an engineer, but although never practiced as an engineer, I think that's where his passion for the outdoors and equipment and working with his hands has come from. He sold a medical suture company in Johannesburg in the mid-90s, and almost on a whim, started looking at farms in the Cape, for a change of lifestyle, for this fresh start. And after a whole summer of viewing farms, flying down and viewing farms in the Cape, he found a farm, the one that I'm sat on now, but it was an apple farm, and it was called Gielsbeck Vlei. which means it's a typically Afrikaans word that means yellow build.
Field. I think Flays like a lagoon
a wet field, a swamp kind of thing.
So yellow big swamp.
Yeah, it's you'd have to know Afrikaans people, as I'm sure you do, Warren, to understand that where that kind of name comes from. So I mean, but the homestead itself in the middle of the property is a beautiful Herbert Baker traditional Cape Dutch style, and I think his emotions got the better of him really, and he ended up paying a lot more for the farm than he probably should have done. But I think when he saw the farm, the trees were laden with fruit. And I think he saw an opportunity there. But as it turned out, the farm was planted with relatively unfashionable older varieties of apples. The trees were past their peak of production, and towards the end of the 90s, the global price of apples fell catastrophically. He even found out from some of the existing workers and locals on the farm that they called it the vuilplaas, which means the dirty farm. So it wasn't quite the investment initially that he was looking for. But ever the optimist and very pragmatic, he installed temperature loggers around the farm and compared it with an established weather station down in the Elgin Valley, and found that it was more or less consistently 2 to 3 degrees cooler than the valley. And he essentially identified this unique mesoclimate that is Iona within the Elgin Valley. So from there, he engaged various people within the wine industry in South Africa. A lot of people did not believe that he'd managed to find a farm with this kind of climate. But his first winemaker, in fact, was one of the people who did not believe him when he first displayed the data to him. And he said, "If you've got this farm, then I will come and make your wine." And that was our first 3 vintages in 2001. So how did we get to Iona? So Andrew Gunn, the surname Gunn is a derivative of a Norwegian name Gunnar, and 1500 years or so ago, the Norwegians were consistently raiding Scotland and northern England, including the home of one of Andrew's ancestors on the island of Iona. In fact, it's the first recorded landing of Vikings in the UK was on the Isle of Iona. So Andrew has lent on that bit of heritage for the name, and indeed on the label there is a Viking longboat. It's part of the sign.
I hadn't registered that was a Viking boat, but that now makes all sense with the way you describe the story. A quick interject there. I believe Rob, that MacDonald is also a Scottish surname, so there seems to be some Scottish heritage flowing through from multiple angles.
It's also based on the Highlands Road, so I mean it's all coming together very nicely with the sort of the Scottish theme on the front.
Very.
So I mean we own and farm all of our vineyards, both on Iona and on Brocha, on Rosie's property, which I'll explain a bit more about in a moment. We believe that great wines are made in the vineyard. It's not great wines are not made in the cellar; they're made in the vineyard, and it's about the grapes that you produce, and then minimal winemaking after that. So Iona employs plenty of sustainable techniques across the farm. We do mechanical weeding, very, very minimal use of herbicides. We have a series of different insects and bacteria across the farm. We have ducks for snail control. We use raptor poles and vine collars around the vines to prevent pests climbing up into the grapes. We have cows and sheep on both properties, which provide compost for our vines, so we minimize our use of commercial fertilizers. We're doing as much as we can within the sort of the confines of producing wines. Rosie
just interject on that first, Rob. On the actual the sort of vinification side of things and the producing of the wines, are you doing wild fermentation as well?
So we do have 3 wines that are wild fermented. So we wild ferment Sauvignon Blanc here in barrel, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And then both wines from Rosie's estate, Brocha, they're both wild fermented. So she has taken the philosophy further. She farms 100% organically and 100% biodynamically. In fact, she is one of only 2 properties in the whole of South Africa that is certified biodynamic. So she really is a trailblazer in the South African wine industry. You speak to a lot of wine farms around the world who claim to farm organically and biodynamically, but as soon as you ask for certification, there normally isn't any. Whereas she, in that regard, is truly an exception and far too honest to farm without the certification.
Yeah. And then just to be clear from the labeling, so that folks know what we're talking about with Sophie, with Rosie's wines, it's the Brocha range, right? And it's the Sophie range we're talking about specifically there.
It's just the Brocha range. So that's Solace and One Man Band. I'll talk through those in a moment. We have in a very South African way, we actually have 20 families that live on the farm with us because we're quite remote. We have a village on the farm which we maintain. Many of the people that work on the farm have been here long before Andrew, we have one family which is in its 3rd generation now of people working on the farm. So there's a huge amount of respect for the people that live here and the service they do to Iona. So they're shareholders, and we have a generous pension fund for all of our workers. The children that are born on the farm have education and social support. We would always rather employ people than machines. So everything is done by hand on the property. It's part of our commitment to the people that are on this farm, and trying to, without putting too fine a point on it, but trying to right some of the wrongs that are in South Africa's past in that regard.
All right, that's great. Good. Anything else about the estate? I mean, can you talk a little? You've kind of a little. You talked about the difference. So what's Rosie's doing versus what's happening on the, should I call it the main estate?
Sure.
Can you just talk a little bit about the 2 different properties and where they're situated? And we already spoke a little bit about the biodynamic side of what's happening on Brocha, but if you could just give us a little, because it's not the same property, right? I guess is my point. There's 2 separate properties. Yeah.
Absolutely. So Iona is 60 hectares up at 420 to 400 meters, 420 to 450 meters above sea level. Whereas Rosie's farm, Brocha, is only 1 kilometer away down into the valley, but it's over 100 meters lower in elevation. So where we grow Burgundy, Loire varietals, and Sancerre, obviously, with Sauvignon Blanc, she grows Northern Rhone varietals. So the climate down there is consistently 2 to 3 degrees warmer, which gives us the opportunity to ripen Cabernet Sauvignon as well as Syrah and Merlot, Petit Verdot, Mourvèdre, Viognier. So there's all of the varietals that go into our One Man Band wine grown on Brocha, and so it's quite a remarkable difference in climate. We're only just 1 kilometer down the road. Right.
And that's an elevation thing, right? Is that the height of the Iona main estate versus the elevation of the Brocha area. Got it.
That's
Good,
right.
thank you,
And
Rob.
then
And then
the other key element, the other key element on that is that on one side of Iona is the Atlantic, and on the other side is the Elgin Valley. So when Brocha is down in the valley, it's sheltered from these winds that come up from the Atlantic. So I mean, it does get misty in the valley, of course, but they don't quite have that same cooling phenomenon that we do.
Got it. Okay, excellent. Should we talk about the wines a little bit now? Should we move on to the wines, and we can always come back and talk about estate as well. But so you know, great to understand that biodiversity, the terroir, the coolness, the obviously the climate, that cloud cover that comes through, which is very unique. And for anybody watching this, you need to go and look at some of the imagery around this area. It's quite gorgeous and beautiful, but it has this sort of eerie look to it because of that that cloud element to it. But let's talk about what that means for the wines. What does that climate, terroir, geography do for the wines themselves? You talked a little bit about what's happening down at Brocha, but what is that all that mix equal when it comes to a bottle of wine on my table, you know, enjoying over a nice meal?
The main thing that it contributes ultimately is balance, and that, as I've said,
Right.
it's because our grapes are allowed to fully ripen, and that is a phenomenon for Elgin as a whole, as a cool climate region. But at Iona, there is this amazing sort of oyster shell minerality through our wines, which just gives our wines a crisp edge, which isn't acidity. It's alongside the acidity, so you know it doesn't feel overly acidic. It gives it a wonderful sharpness that then sits alongside fresh and well-developed fruit flavors, and that is just perfectly in balance. And I believe that is something that Iona, as it's starting to prove, it can do. The site can do better than many other places in the world.
Amazing. So you've got quite a you know, and I'm looking on my other screen here on the range. The you know, you've got quite a interesting range across the Iona, which I think you call it the Elgin Highlands range, and then you go down into the single vineyards, and then you've got some limited releases as well. Can you give us a little description of the range, Rob, and just give us a little picture of the differences between them, so we can distinguish between them? Yeah,
absolutely. So all of our wines from Iona that form part of the Elgin Highlands range all have the word monopole on the bottle. This is a Burgundian, because in Burgundy, often producers will only own a fraction of a vineyard site, whereas we own all of our vineyard sites outright, and we do not buy or sell grapes for our wines. We produce 2 Sauvignon Blancs, a Chardonnay, and a Pinot Noir on the estate. Our Sauvignon Blanc, in fact, on Wednesday, 2 days ago, it was named as one of South Africa's top 10 Sauvignon Blancs, which is absolutely fantastic.
Amazing.
It's great to have that recognition. It's vibrant and fruity with this mineral elegance, and that balances it and gives it this sort of delicate nature, which it's being recognised now, which is lovely. Alongside that Sauvignon Blanc, we do a wild ferment Sauvignon Blanc. So this is in more of a Bordeaux style. So the wine is wooded and has Semillon in it. And the wine is wild fermented in large wood formats and in 400 litre casks, and it still has this minerality, this salinity through it, but the fruit flavors are much more developed. We have much more sort of white stone fruit and even blackcurrant and things coming into the palate, which is lovely, but it still has that zesty long finish that everybody's looking for from Sauvignon Blanc. So they're two distinct reflections of Sauvignon Blanc on the farm. You have your classic, just overt Sauvignon Blanc, which is just fruity and blossomy and fresh, and then one which is more complex and for perhaps for somebody who's looking for sort of a slightly more involved drink. So it's lovely to have the two offerings side by side.
Amazing.
Then we have our Chardonnay, which we're actually planting more Chardonnay as we speak. It was Decanter Awards Best in Show last year, which has led us to invest in it on the farm. We put it through 20% wood, and then the rest is second, third, and fourth fill. It's 100% barrel fermented. Again, it's a wonderful combination of these bright citrus flavors and white stone fruits, balanced by that oyster shell minerality, and then the wood is very subtle and well integrated, and so you just have this lovely sense of hints of sort of brioche and the texture provided by the oxidation in barrel. So it's a wonderfully layered and complex wine, but with a lingering fruity finish.
Amazing. I would just back to the Sauvignon for a second. The interesting factoid I learned just recently is that just across the Western Cape region or the Winelands region, there's like 12 different flavor profiles or 12 different varietals, if you like, of Sauvignon alone. So it's interesting when people think about Sauvignon, they sometimes just have this picture or this profile in their head of what it is. But the fact that you guys have got two different labels, if you like, of Sauvignon, it kind of talks to that, I guess, the fact that you have this quite broad range of what a Sauvignon Blanc is within the region, and then you guys doing the sort of the more wild ferment one versus for lack of a better word, traditional, is great. And I haven't tasted them yet. I look forward to tasting them, but I'm assuming that there's a distinct difference between the two.
Oh, absolutely. And the Sauvignon Blanc is wonderful on its own, cold on a sunny day, as I think the vast majority of Sauvignon Blanc is drunk. But the wild ferment barrel fermented one is definitely for food pairing.
Right.
with fish, with lobster, with seafood. One of the restaurants in Cape Town pairs it in their tasting menu with lobster and with mango and chili. It's
amazing. It sounds
a wonderful combination. Interestingly, at this,
just a quick
far away. Sorry.
No, keep going. I was going to change direction. Keep going.
No, I was just going to say that interestingly, at the award ceremony on Wednesday, where they announced the top 10, and they just announced the top 10. They don't break it down any further from that. But this year, I think it was 6 out of the 10 were either wild fermented or fermented in barrel, which just shows that the times are changing for Sauvignon Blanc, and that its position as a sort of an entry-level, bright, fresh, fruity wine is being challenged, and it's starting to become a much more complex, real drink for connoisseurs, which is lovely to see, because it really gets to flex its muscles a bit more, with a bit more winemaking and a bit more attention that it deserves.
Amazing. Let's move on to the single vineyards. Let's talk about what you guys are doing in that space. You've got, I believe, 4 different labels there. At least in my notes, I've picked up 4. So you want to talk us through the Fynbos and the Kloof and the Kroon labels, and let's see what they're all about.
So those names that you said there, Fynbos, Kloof, and Kroon, those are the names of single vineyard sites on the property. So those wines are designed. They're very small batch. We only ever do about 500-600 bottles of each. They're designed as a real sort of wine drinker's opportunity to see how expressive single vineyard site on the estate can be. They're very small batch, and we sell them by allocation, and they inevitably all sell out. So they're really fun and a great opportunity to see how two adjacent vineyards can produce quite remarkably different wines. Just small variations in microclimate, in soil, but otherwise vinified in the same way. But suddenly you've got these well, upon inspection, quite different wines. So they're a lovely range of wines that we have in our portfolio for the real enthusiasts.
Amazing. And you can talk us a little bit about again, you've got the monopole on the bottle. It's obviously limited release. Forgive me if you've covered this already, but just give me a back to the definition of monopole on this bottle. Can you talk a little about what that means?
Monopole is derived from the same word as monopoly. So it comes back to that the Burgundian, that multiple producers or winemakers would share grapes from a single block. Whereas if a producer owns the entire block, the entire vineyard, they can put the word monopole onto their label. Okay,
thank you for that. So limited edition, which is great, which gives it that sense of exclusivity. Obviously, single vineyard or single lot. And what's your sort of a loaded question? What's the limited edition stock like at the moment?
We we do have some of the Cron Pinot Noir, which is lovely. In fact, I don't think I've mentioned our Pinot Noir yet. So Pinot Noir is the only red grape that we grow on Iona. It's obviously the classic pairing to Chardonnay from Burgundy. And the wines that we produce here are beautifully perfumed with rose petals on the nose, and ripe black and red cherries, strawberries, and a little hint of spice. It's the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir that we then make single vineyards, and we only ever make the single vineyard vintages if we truly believe that vintage from that block is deserving.
Okay, good.
So this year we're sold out. We've sold out and we'll move to a new vintage in the new year.
Okay. Oh, that's a pity, because I would love to have got my hands on some of that, but we'll have to wait until the new vintage to come through.
I think you will. Yes, I think sorry, I did mention. I think that there is some Cron Pinot Noir, I believe.
Yes.
We'll check stocks and compare notes with you after the call, Warren.
Nice, thank you. All right, let's keep moving. Let's talk. We've already touched on Brocha a little bit, but let's talk about a little bit more information if you've got it on the one-man band and the Solace. Just looking at the bottles, they're very different looking from a packaging point of view. Actually, quite beautiful and very simple in their designs. But let's talk about the juice inside the bottle and how we got there.
Absolutely. So I think Rosie and I produced a wonderful video. But as I said, the farm is biodynamic and organic, and is home to Northern Rhone blends, so predominantly Syrah. She produces two wines. One is a blend with about half Syrah, and the remainder made up with Petit Verdot, Cab Sauv, Mourvèdre, Viognier, and Nebbiolo. Then she makes a 100% Syrah wine called Solace, which won a gold medal at this year's Decanter Awards, which is absolutely fantastic.
Amazing.
They both they both display it's quintessential to Syrah, or to Shiraz. It's this sort of black peppery note that sits over the top of the ripe fruits, and it's something that everybody always looks for when they taste a Syrah, and these two wines do not disappoint in that regard.
Okay. And then from this, correct me if I'm wrong here, Rob. The Rosie's also oversees the Sophie range. Is that right?
So we have the two estates. We have Iona and we have Brocha, and they produce wines that are grown and vinified on site. We also have a range which is by Iona, so it has all the same level of care and attention when it comes to winemaking, and is often made in our own cellars. But it uses grapes that are either surplus to our estate ranges, or we buy in grapes from the rest of Elgin and neighbouring wine regions that you mentioned, Walker Bay and Himalanada. So other sort of adjacent wine regions. So we have Mr. P, which is a Pinot Noir, and that mainly uses our own grapes as well. And then we have the Sophie range, which is a Sauvignon Blanc, a rosé, which is made from Pinotage, which is grown in the valley. It's a Pinotage and Merlot blend, which I think is very unusual, and the use of Pinotage in rosé, I think, is almost exclusive to South Africa. And then there's a red blend, which varies from vintage to vintage, but it's Shiraz based as well, because it's Elgin Valley. So Syrah grows exceptionally well here.
Amazing. And what's interesting, just looking at the price point profiles, the Sophie seems to be the most accessible from a price point, which I would guess is you guys are pushing out into possibly higher volume. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And more, it gets people into the Elgin brand, if you like, but in a much more accessible way because of the price point. I'm making some assumptions there.
Absolutely. But that's absolutely correct. They are, wine should be accessible to all drinkers, right. and so we make wines at two distinct price points. We have our sort of entry level by Iona range, which it's the wine that we drink. We love it, and but then there is the estate wines that are slightly more, they're unique because they're from our actual estates. Right. So they really do display that climate of Iona and the distinct climate of Brocha as well, and that's the difference.
Nice, very nice. Super interested to taste that Pinotage infused rosé. That sounds really unique and interesting. So I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a bottle of that for sure.
Absolutely.
That's about as much of the journey as we've talked through here, Robin. Is there anything else that we haven't covered off, or as I always like to end off with a lot of these conversations, is there anything that we can't find online or find in a brochure that you would want to share? Or I know we've shared a lot of factoids already, but any other last thoughts before we close out?
I would just say that Iona and Brocha included, Elgin as a young wine region has a huge amount of potential. So be it our wines or wines from our friends and neighbours, this is going to be a wine region to watch in a big way over the next 20 years as climate change starts to affect France in particular, as a region that grows all the same varietals that we do. And as the pricing of Burgundy gets even more off the charts as the years go by, what Elgin and what Iona and Brocha offer is an unbelievable alternative at a completely different price point. And I think with an exceptional, sustainable, and socially responsible alternative.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rob. I mean, this has been super informative and really rich in getting an understanding of what you guys are doing there. The wines look beautiful. I think by the sounds of it, the juice inside the bottle, as I say, is quality. I can't wait to get my hands on some of these bottles to try out. Let's loop back, I think, in the coming days, so we can get some more access to the single vineyard wines in the new year, because I think that's going to be super interesting to taste. But thanks again. I'll chat to you soon, and appreciate the time.
That's an absolute pleasure. And of course, any follow-up questions or anything else you need from me, I'm at your disposal.
Thanks, Rob. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Warren. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.